Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to tonight's much-anticipated event. Today we're joined by Imran Khan himself. Imran Khan is a politician and a former cricketer who served as the 22nd Prime Minister of Pakistan from 2018 to 2022. One of the all-time cricketing greats, he won the 1992 World Cup. He founded the Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf party in 1996 and served as the Prime Minister of Pakistan. It gives me great pleasure and honor to welcome Imran Khan to give an address to the Oxford Union today with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to address the Oxford Union. I have, I think, spoken about 3 times before. But today is a very critical time in my country's history when I'm speaking to you. So let me just first start by saying why someone who was a cricketer, who didn't really have to do anything after finishing sports. Because, you know, we sportsmen, if we reach a certain level in sports, and then once we give up sports, then we don't really have to do anything. All we have to do is talk about that sport for the rest of our lives and earn, pretty good money by just going on television and speaking. So why did, again, someone like me who had no reason to be in politics, I mean, if someone asked me to take politics as a career, I would shoot myself. Because, the idea of going and asking for votes from people, someone who doesn't need to, I mean, it never has, I've never understood the idea of being a career politician. So I came into politics for one reason. Because having played cricket, seen the world, and then contrasting the system in England, because I used to play professional cricket there, and then seeing Pakistan and most of the developing world, I came to this one conclusion. The reasons why nations fail is only one reason: not having rule of law. And the reasons why countries are prosperous is because they have rule of law. So I call my party Movement for Justice. And I launched this 26 years ago and started really from nothing, no political background. And for most of my first 15 years, people mostly laughed at me because there were 2 entrenched parties. We had a 2-party system. And I came against both the parties. So, and these 2 family parties have ruled Pakistan for 30 years. And in this time, corruption has reached the highest point, whereas our economies, Pakistan's economy, which till 1990 was ahead of all the economies in the subcontinent, from 1990 onwards, when these 2 families took turns to rule Pakistan, we started going down, and we were overtaken by even Bangladesh, which was way behind us. So the reason was simple. We did not have rule of law. And that's why, again, Movement for Justice. And the whole problem, not just with Pakistan, it's with the entire developing world. We have this problem. The ruling elites in our developing world do not want to come under the rule of law. They want a separate law for themselves. So if you cannot bring the powerful under the rule of law, if the powerful are above law, that's how a country becomes eventually a banana republic. The difference, and I was looking at the rule of law index. If you look at Switzerland, Switzerland's rule of law index is 99.9%. Compare that to Nigeria, which has the greatest oil reserves in Africa. The rule of law index in Nigeria is 7%. So similarly, most of the poor countries are under 20%. And almost all the Western democracies are over 90%. So the difference is, just to why I came into politics was to bring the powerful. These two corrupt families, both of them had been dismissed for corruption when I came into politics. Twice they were dismissed for corruption. So then started this struggle. It took me 22 years finally to succeed and come into government. Now, the biggest challenge I faced immediately was that all the mafias associated with these political mafias, they all resisted. They resisted our government the moment we tried to bring them, get them under law. And the more we tried, the more they ganged up. And these two main parties who had opposed each other for almost 30 years, now they ganged up and had a joint front against me. So what happens? I mean, we first, just to give you my 3.5 years in politics, I inherited a government which was bankrupt. We had the biggest current account deficit. And as a result, there was pressure on our currency because our reserves had shrunk to about 9 billion, which is 4 weeks of our imports. So from there, a bankrupt economy, we steadied the economy the first year. Second year, we were hit by COVID-19, like the whole world was. And so the 2 years, my second and third year, we were grappling with the situation of lockdown, not how to stop the spread of the virus and at the same time save your economy. And the lockdown affected the poor people the most. So we took a very unusual decision at the time. We refused to have a full lockdown. And we started having, what we call smart lockdowns to protect our poor people because there were daily wages. There were weekly people who relied on weekly wage. We had 70% of our workforce was in the informal sector. So had we locked down, we would have had starvation because we already started from a bankrupt economy. But in the end, that worked. And we saved our population from COVID. We had the lowest death rate in the subcontinent. We saved our economy. And so in our third and fourth year, we grew at 5.7% and 6%, which is in 17 years the highest growth rate. And we had record exports by managing our economy in this difficult time. We managed to help the farmers. So anyway, the country was poised sort of for a higher growth rate. And this is all in the economic survey of Pakistan, which is published every year. If you have a chance to look at the figures, because the country was actually growing very quickly. We had a problem which the whole world was post-COVID, and that was the commodity super cycle, the energy prices going up. And then with Ukraine, they went up further. So grappling with this, trying to stop imported inflation, which in UK you're facing exactly the same situation. So at that time, this conspiracy, this conspiracy took place. What was this conspiracy? On 6th of March 22, the Under-Secretary of State of the US, he meets the Pakistani ambassador in Washington. And, this is an official meeting. There were note takers on both sides. And he says that, look, there's a vote of no confidence coming. At this time, there was no vote of no confidence against me. And he said, if it succeeds if it doesn't succeed against me, in ousting me, then there will be consequences for Pakistan. But if it succeeds, then all will be forgiven. So this arrogant discourse takes place between the ambassador and this Donald Lu, who was the Under-Secretary of State in Washington. I read the cipher. Now imagine, here I read this, that he's telling my ambassador, he's telling my ambassador to get rid of me, the Prime Minister. So, I'm a bit like anyone would be taken aback. The next day, the vote of no confidence is tabled against me. And suddenly about 20 of our parliamentarians start meeting with the opposition. And then openly there was this horse trading taking place, horse trading, where roughly about $1 million were being dished out to buy our M&As. And so our government falls. But what happens after, subsequently, what happens? We are replaced by a government where 60% of the cabinet is on bail on corruption cases. And the two families that had been calling each other crooked and putting each other in jail and corruption cases unite against me, are brought into power, and they then try and suppress this movement because people spontaneously came out in the streets. First time it's happened in our history. So people came out in the streets protesting against this regime change. And they then used brute force. Pakistan hasn't, under democratic government, they have never experienced what in the last 6 months happened. They used, on 25th of May, we had a peaceful protest. The police went into people's houses. Thousands were put in jail. There were women, families, children were, because in our protest, families participate. First time ever, so much women participate in our rallies. So they tear gassed them, they beat them up, and this is all on video. So that happened on the 25th May. But what they thought was that would scare people. It actually had the opposite effect. So rather than our movement after post my government going, rather than it sort of slowing down, the movement got stronger and stronger. And there were two sets of by-elections, one in July and then one earlier this month. So both by-elections were swept by us, by my political party. So since then what has happened is that this reign of terror is taking place in our country. There's a clampdown on media, unprecedented. There are cases on me, there are terrorism cases. They came to arrest me on a terrorism case, and the case is that one of my close aides was subjected to custodial torture. He was sexually abused. He was stripped naked. So I gave a statement in a rally. I did a protest rally against it, and I said, the judge that sent him back to remand, in other words, when he was tortured, he was presented in front of a judge. Rather than giving him a bail, the judge actually sent him back to the police station who had tortured him in the first place. So I said we would take legal action against the judge. They slapped terrorism case against me. They came to arrest me. So this sort of thing is going on in the country. Then they try to disqualify me because they realize that they can't beat us in elections anymore. So the situation right now in Pakistan is this. There's a clampdown on media. Journalists who support me, who have stood with me, are hounded. One left the country. Two were beaten up. One was put into jail. And then the most tragic thing that has happened, and of all the things it's affected, I'm still affected by it because I've announced my protest march today. Just now I've announced it, that we will be doing a huge, and inshallah, in my belief, it will be the biggest ever protest in our history. A journalist of great integrities, one of the most respected investigative journalists, Arshad Sharif. He was constantly writing about this regime change and how this conspiracy took place, and he constantly wrote against it, and these crooks which have taken over, who, by the way, $5 billion of their corruption cases, they came into power, and through a legislation, person-specific legislation in assembly, they're removing themselves from these corruption cases. It's never happened before. So So people who were writing against them were subjected to all sorts of victimization. But the most tragic one was Arshad Sharif. First, they threatened him. They went into his house and abused his family and threatened him. And this guy, one of the most courageous, bravest journalists I have ever met, I warned him. I found out that his life was under threat. I warned him. Then a second time when I warned him, we managed to get him out of Pakistan. We had a government in KP, so we managed to get him out of Pakistan to Dubai. There his visa was running out. So Pakistan government was wanting him back. So in order to get away from being facing certain death in Pakistan, he then went to Kenya where he didn't need a visa. And day before yesterday, he was murdered, assassinated in Kenya. And that has really, it's a mixture of depression and hatred in this country right now. And hence I've announced my march. And the idea of this protest march is to show the government where the public stands right now. And as I say, I have been, last 6 months I've been on the road and campaigning. And I feel right now that the country is ripe for a soft revolution. I don't think that anyone who tries to get into the way of this change, there are two ways of changing. You can have a soft revolution through ballot box, or there's the other way, which causes destruction in a society. But I just believe that we are now on the brink. Either we are going to change peacefully, or I'm afraid it will lead to chaos in our country. So that's where we stand today. So I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much for that address. I'd like to sort of get into some questions before we get into some questions from the audience here at the Oxford Union. And I wanted to start off with of course, the biggest news that is surrounding freedom of press at the moment. So we all heard about the recent tragic news of Arshad Sharif's death in Kenya, from yourself as well. And it is a very sort of difficult thing. It brings into question the freedom of press in Pakistan in general. So freedom of press has been a big issue in Pakistan. According to Reporters Without Borders, out of 180 countries, Pakistan was placed 157th. What do you think should be done to uphold freedom of press in Pakistan and to protect freedom of press? I mean, even in addition to this, ARY, which is one of the biggest news channels in Pakistan, was closed, shut down. So I wonder, what do you think would be a solution to this sort of moving forward?
Look, let me say that who is worried from freedom of press? If I'm breaking the law, or if I'm a crook, I'm a head of state and I'm worried that I'm making a lot of money laundering, like most of our leaders have been buying properties abroad in Mayfair and in London and big places, laundering money from this country. So I would want to clamp down on the media. Let me just say this is the case for the entire developing world. According to the United Nations Secretary General, he set up a panel. That panel is called Fact-Eye Panel. It was to find out why is there a difference, the difference between the rich and the poor countries, why is this increasing? And it came up with startling results. Number one, they said that every year, now you will all be shocked to hear this, every year, $1.7 trillion move from the developing world into the developed world, into the richer countries, offshore accounts. $1.7 trillion from poor countries or developing countries move to offshore accounts, rich countries, properties in London, New York, and big Western capitals. I mean, this is a plunder going on of the developing world at an incredible speed. If anyone who understands the history of the Indian subcontinent, you know, when the East India Company came into to India and started operating and took charge, India was about 23–24% of the world GDP. And by the time, you know, India got its independence, it was, you know, barely 3–4% of the world GDP. So the wealth was stripped off the country. It's exactly what the ruling elites of the developing world are doing right now. They're stripping off the wealth from the poor countries and taking them, as I said, into these tax havens. Now, problem is that I tried 3.5 years I was in power. I tried each time in the United Nations General Assembly. I kept saying that there has to be action taken against this illicit flow of money out of developing world, just like you do of terror financing or like drug money, which affect the Western countries. They must do something to stop this plunder of the developing world. But there is no incentive in the rich countries to do anything because they benefit from this flow of money. And it's the poor countries which, unfortunately, they do not want to do anything because, sadly, a lot of the leaders of the developing world are laundering money out of their country. So they're also not interested. So what is happening is that the poor people are getting poorer. This gap will increase and you will have this economic migrants. You know, this is just going to become an epidemic sometime ahead. You will have these people dying and crossing, you know, in these boats trying to get to the well-off countries. Something has to be done to stop this. And I'm afraid the developing world sooner or later must realize that this situation cannot go on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that speaks to generally sort of a problem with sort of the, like, you know, many problems within like developing countries as well. But the more particular thing that I, you know, sort of intended to touch on was the upholding the freedom of press in Pakistan in general. But one thing that I wanted to particularly mention, following up on that, on my previous question as well, was that during your tenure as the Prime Minister, Pakistan dropped 18 points in press freedom, according to Reporters Without Borders. I was just wondering, what did your government, what sort of steps did they take to uphold freedom of press in your government? Of course, now it's very bad in the state that a journalist is dead in Kenya, and a news channel is shut down. I just reiterate the question of, like, how do we get out of this situation where the press in our country is just not safe? These things that we talk about here will never be sort of brought into light.
Okay, let me just explain to you the difference between what was happening during my time and what is happening now. There was not one journalist that my government ever thought of, forget about persecuting, I mean, even trying to muzzle him. Because if I have nothing to hide, if I'm not corrupt, and if I'm not breaking the country's law, why would I be scared of freedom of press? The people who are scared are the mafias. And this is what is happening right now. These are mafias. The problem we had, and which is why maybe, because what, you say that we went down a few notches. Look, when I took over, we had been going through this war on terror. 80,000 Pakistanis died in this war on terror, which we participated in, which we never should have. It wasn't our war. But as a result, 80,000 Pakistanis died. Right now, there is still terrorism. We still have Pakistanis dying of terrorism, but on the peripheries, not like it was before. But when you're fighting against terrorism, I'm afraid that's when the security agencies, then they take a much stronger role. And the abuses would take place by the security agencies because they felt they were fighting terrorism and they were endangering their soldiers' lives. And so they would be sometimes taking very harsh actions against anyone who criticized the security forces. But those actions were always by the agencies. And the 2-3 times when we found out, and I can give you examples, immediately we took action when, journalists were picked up. But never from the political government, because we had nothing to hide. In fact, the only problem we had was we don't have libel laws. So what was happening is that me as Prime Minister, I was libeled a couple of times. I went to court as a Prime Minister, but even I couldn't get justice because we have a real problem with defamation and libel laws. No one gets convicted here. So what we need is, we need freedom of press and responsible press, where if you cross, like in UK, if you cross a certain line, then I should have the ability to go to court and get, compensation. And I've been in a libel case in England, and I know how strong the laws is. Unfortunately, this is not the case in Pakistan, which is the problem my government had.
No, absolutely. That puts it into context, especially sort of the transition between governments and the freedom of press. But moving on to sort of a more recent event, which has been like recent news, is the recent decision by the Pakistani Electoral Commission to disqualify you from being a member of the parliament. Where do you stand on this decision, and do you see yourself successfully running for a re-election in 2023?
When I started playing cricket, and when children and as boys we used to play cricket. So when the other team used to be losing, a lot of the times the boys would just pick up the stumps and run away and say, we are not playing anymore. Now this is exactly what's happening right now. In 2 by-elections which we've competed, it's never happened before that sitting governments have been routed in the by-elections. And it's because of massive public turnout. And it's also because, despite the fact that the election commissioner is completely biased. It's not even biased, he's just part of their team. It's like them playing with their own very biased umpire. Now, and I'll just give you an example. 9 times the election commissioner has given decisions against us. 9 times we've gone to the court who've overturned the decisions because they've been so biased. This thing of my disqualification, it is just, it is unbelievable. In fact, I'm going to do a defamation case against this election commissioner because it will never stand in a court of law. And we are waiting, we are already in court, we are waiting for the full judgment has just come. It is, I won't go into details, but it is just a joke what he's done. Not just that, there were 2 cases they're trying to disqualify me. One is a funding case, a funding of the political party. We are the only political party in Pakistan's history that does proper political fundraising. We have a 40,000 database of our donors. Other parties have nothing. And we keep telling them that, look, we are the ones who, everything is on record. They have been trying to find out something in our funding case for almost 6 years. So neither will I be getting disqualified in the funding case, and certainly not in this Tosha Khana case, which is too ridiculous to explain to you. But we are in court, and I'm confident that they'll be brushed aside by the court. But there is a desperation. They've just done another terrorism case on me. So they might, God knows, they might try something else. I have had 24 cases against me right now.
Now, your government has had good relations with the military, or had good relations with the military when in power. After the no confidence vote and after a series of events, your party distanced itself from, and in some instances it was said to have spoken against the military. What is your stance on the military's involvement in the country's politics and in the country's running?
So look, first of all, let me say, Pakistan became a security state when we came into existence, because there was a fear in Pakistan that we have a neighbor who's 7 times the size of our country, much more resourceful. And immediately after independence, the next year, 47 we were independent, 48 there was a conflict with India on Kashmir. So that framed the mindset of our country. because the fear that a huge neighbor can easily overwhelm us. So the military naturally, in such circumstances, gained more importance. And then we had martial laws. So we've had 3 martial laws where the military took over when they thought that the civilian governments weren't doing well. Now, the problem with this is that, we have never had an extended run of democracy. So that balance that should be in a society between bearing in mind we are a security state, so the balance between the military establishment and a civilian government, that balance has never really been there. So what happens is that when you have a democratic government, the responsibility lies with the democratic government to deliver. But the democratic government does not have all the power. So it does not always have all the authority. So unless authority and responsibility lie in one place, it's very difficult for any management system to work. Now, I'll give you just one example where, in fact, I had a very good relationship with the military establishment. There were no problems between us. In fact, it was a complementary relationship. But the one area where I had this problem was because I had been campaigning for 22 years when I came into power, that the powerful must be held accountable. They must be brought under the law. So action must be taken against them. So they were openly stealing money, laundering money out of country, living in these palatial palaces or huge luxury flats in London, money stolen from this country, and never giving any money trail or source of income. How did they acquire this great wealth? So we saw them. I knew these 2 families for the last 40 years, and I saw these rags to riches stories where they never had this sort of money, but suddenly they're worth billions of dollars now, lying in outside Pakistan. So my point was that these 2 corrupt families and people associated with them, they should be held accountable, and there were already cases pending in our accountability bureau. So all I was asking them was that action must be taken. Now, unfortunately, the accountability bureau was not in my hands. So and they were controlled by the establishment. Now, I would keep telling them that, look, take action against these people. But unfortunately, for some reason, the establishment's views on corruption were completely different to mine. They did not take that seriously. I kept telling them that no country can prosper if the ruling elite is siphoning off money outside the country. And, I kept, because, they didn't have any idea. They did not understand the difference, as I have mentioned earlier, why countries fail. The developing world and the developed world is rule of law, because the reason why countries prosper is because once you have law, you have level playing field, you unleash the potential of a society. But when you have all the resources are controlled by a tiny elite, the people are enslaved by that. So the societies just cannot grow. And then when you launder money outside your country, when the ruling elite launders money outside the country, it puts pressure on your currency, which devalues. When that devalues, it causes poverty because inflation, imported inflation takes place. So this is where the point of disagreement took place. I kept telling them that, look, this Bureau of Accountability is under you, take action. And they just, for them, corruption was no big deal.
No, thank you for that. I will ask one last question regarding something that you mentioned and have been of course, very strong about, is mentioning the 2 political parties. Of course, there's 2 families. You've mentioned the dynastic politics has been a huge problem in Pakistani politics. And I think people would agree that one thing that PTI is seen as different is that it offers, what it offers is hope of making it to the top of leadership without being part of a particular dynasty, for people who are competent, for people on their merits. Now, though it is true in your case personally Beyond you, it is argued that PTI is now sabotaged by dynastic families within it. Do you have a plan to end this dynastic politics within PTI, or do you think it's inevitable in the Pakistani political system?
Look, as all of you sitting there would know, the reason why democracy forged ahead of monarchy or kingship is because democracy, actually, the better the democracy, the better the meritocracy. And kingship is bound to decay because, I'll give you the example of the Mughals, the great Mughals who ruled India. And India was a superpower at that time. So in 180 years, there were 6 Mughal emperors who ruled for 180 years. And when the last great Mughal died, in the next 17 years, there were 6 different Mughal emperors. Something like what is happening in Britain right now. So problem is when in kingship, because there's no meritocracy, it all depends that if the son or the successor of the royal blood, is he capable or not? And if he's not, the whole thing goes down, as the Mughal Empire went down. And as the Ottoman Empire started going down, because once one poor head of state comes, because there's no meritocracy. Democracy, the better the democracy, the better the meritocracy, and therefore you have better leadership. Now, problem with Pakistan has been that we have what is called the feudal system. The feudal system meant that there were the rural landlords who had huge land holdings. They could do politics because they had time and money. Because, normal people just don't have the time and money to do full-time politics. So they dominated Pakistani political scene. And they became, the children then succeeded. So it became a family affair. As these two parties are, they are family affairs. They are, for instance, the Benazir's son, Bilawal, he's never worked 1 hour in his life. And he's head of their party. Same as Nawaz Sharif's successor, his daughter, she's never worked one hour in her life. So they imagine when they take over, so we have the worst of both worlds. Sometimes the princes were actually trained in statecraft. So they were much better prepared than in our case with these feudal children who have no experience of governance or statecraft. So therefore, the families have gradually, the country has gone down, as have the parties gone down. Now in my party, what I hope, and I tried once, we held a huge intra-party election. It was the first time a party had held such a huge scale intra-party election, but it didn't work properly because it was the first time we had tried. We tried a second time and we tried to use technology, but the elections, the general elections came, so we stopped. But my idea is that the only way you can have meritocracy in the parties if you have party elections. So from the experiences we've gained now, we are setting up a system to have a proper intra-party election. And that election will ensure meritocracy. And that is the only way you stop this dynastic politics. If a family member is good enough, fine, he can come up through the elections. But it should not be this nomination that just because you're born in a certain family, you should be automatically, get a party ticket. That should not happen.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for this conversation. I would like to sort of, for the last part of this conversation, move to the floor for any questions that they may have for yourself. So yeah, I open the floor for any questions. I recognize this member in the blue jacket.
Hi. First of all, Mr. Khan, it's a pleasure to speak to you. Secondly, in your speech, you put an increased emphasis on the impact of the US in, the downfall of the PTI. And we've seen that these developed nations through which a lot of developing nations' money now goes to, regularly interfere in the matters of, well, South Asia and the global South. To what extent do you think that the problems that South Asia faces today are not a product of its people, but of people of a faraway land that steal from us?
Well, look, let me just say one thing, that great powers always want to have their sphere of influence. And they always want, this is throughout history, they always want governments that are part of their influence, so would do their bidding. And unfortunately, Pakistani governments have all been in the US sphere of influence. And we have, the worst thing in my opinion, where we did, part of our foreign policy is that we made decisions not for the benefit of our own people, but to please the US. So we joined the war on terror after 2001. And 80,000 Pakistanis died. 3.5 million people got internally displaced. Our ally, the US, conducted 400 drone attacks on Pakistan. Judge, jury, and executioner. So many innocent people got killed. And they took revenge against Pakistan's security forces. And we lost over $100 billion to our economy. And we didn't even get thanked for that. And I opposed that war throughout because it was not in Pakistan's interest. So countries make decisions which are of interest to their people. One of the things which was mentioned in this Donald Lu in the cipher, in the conversation with our ambassador in Washington, he said that I had taken a decision to go to Russia on my own. And that was held against me. But why was I going to Russia? Because Russia would have supplied us with cheap oil. India, an ally of US, is getting oil from Russia at 40% discount. Now, 120 million Pakistanis are vulnerable. Almost 50 to 60 million are below the poverty line. Another 50 to 60 million, a price shock, inflation, would push them down the poverty line. Means they can't have 2 square meals a day. So my interest should be my people. I should not be serving the interest of another country at the expense of my own people. So my people, 220 million people elected me to serve them, not to serve other countries' foreign policy objectives. And this is where the problem rose. US is not used to Pakistan having an independent foreign policy. They wanted these pliant stooges like the one right now who's our prime minister, who would do whatever they order him to do. So it doesn't mean you're anti-American. This is the problem, this imperialistic mindset, that if you do not obey them, then you are anti-American. But if you talk about your own national interest, which is what I did, and I think for somehow in this Biden administration, they just thought that I wasn't the right one, and they wanted a more pliable stooge.
No, thank you very much. I now look for another member to ask a question. I recognize that member just right there. Could you please take the mic there, second row?
So hopefully you do come back in power. Hopefully you are able to reduce the army's power and by doing so reduce corruption, fix the legal system, and fix dynastic politics. So in that process, how do you think you'll be able to control how much power you individually have? So in other words, as you break down this corrupt military control system, how do you make sure that this new system is democratic?
Look, like Pakistan, like most of the developing world, we have series of problems. There are a lot of problems we face. Number one, we just do not have enough money to spend on our human beings. So, human development, you can't really rise as a nation if you don't look after your human resource, if you don't invest in your human beings. Problem is, that all this prosperity comes after the rule of law. So it's my entire life's experience that unless you have rule of law, you don't have democracy. If you hold elections without having rule of law, you will have warlords, you will have mafias coming up, because they will have more resources. They will have the muscle. So in a society, the key is, I go back, which is why I started my politics 26 years ago. You must bring the powerful under the law. So this is my number one thing. If you ask me, what is the one thing I would do if I ever get it back into power, is rule of law. But you can only do that if you have a good majority in a parliamentary democracy. Last time when I came into power, I had a coalition government, not a strong government. And so therefore, it was very difficult in a parliamentary democracy. If you come up with a coalition government and a thin majority, you are always subjected to blackmail. You can't make strong decisions because, you upset powerful mafias who then have ways of undermining you. So if I come into power, I will firstly only come into power if I have a clear majority, because otherwise I would not be able to implement my reform agenda, which starts with rule of law. And I believe that everything follows that. Prosperity follows once you've established rule of law and justice.
I recognize the member, well, just I recognize this, Rafa. It's the rule of law.
Hello, Mr. Khan. Thank you very much for joining us here today. You talked about rule of law. While it is very important to uphold the rule of law, but during your tenure, you've been accused of breaking the rule of law yourself. You've been accused of breaking the Constitution, Article 92, by preventing the no-confidence vote despite the Supreme Court's decision. During your tenure, there was a sitting MNA who was incarcerated despite the Supreme Court decision to release him, and yet your speakers did not give an order to bring them to the parliament despite it being against the law. So, firstly, while you do talk about the rule of law, how do you respond to the fact that you yourself have breached it? Secondly, and very quickly I'll ask, you talked about press freedom. During your time, there was a journalist who was abducted and tortured, Matiullah Jan. During your time, Abzar Alam was shot. It was during your time, Nusrat Javed, another journalist who criticized you, had to leave her job. Salim Safi had to leave a job. So, while you do talk about press freedom, when you are out of the government, when you were in the government, you were yourself curbed on press freedom. So there's a pattern that while you are in government, you do something else. When you're outside the government, you do like to appeal to a populist agenda. Thank you.
So let's start first by Matiullah Jan. We found out Matiullah Jan had been picked up night before. The first thing we did was in the morning when we found out he was released. We found out that he had been picked up by the security agencies because he had said something against them. My government immediately had him released. The other guy who was shot had actually nothing to do with freedom of media. It was a personal dispute which we investigated and found out. There was no journalist that where my government clamped down upon. There was not one journalist. These incidents, there was maybe one other incident that had to do with the security forces. And let me explain. Why were the security forces used to this? Because while we were in the war on terror, there were a lot of instances where the security forces would act in the name of fighting terror. And this was not just in the case in Pakistan. If you look at the US with Guantanamo Bay, fighting terrorism, always they used to take more liberties. So remember, my government had nothing to hide. So there was nothing. And now you talk about an MNA. Which MNA are you talking about? No MNA had anything to do with where our government had him incarcerated. And what law are you talking about which I had broken? When my government, when it came to this no confidence motion, we just announced elections. We had this option. It was in the Constitution. It went into the Supreme Court. We had a right. It wasn't against the law. If rather than having your members of parliament being sold like, like sheep in an auction, the best was go to the people, let them decide, who they wanted to form government in Pakistan, rather than having spending millions of dollars to get buying your members of parliament. So what was wrong with asking for elections? That wasn't breaking any law.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. We'll have one or two more questions because we're arriving to the end of the event. Could you please give a chance to the person in the second row there, up at the front? Yeah.
Assalamu alaikum, Imran Khan. My name is Imran Khan, and my question to you is, Pakistan, like PTI is not the first political struggle or movement, that Pakistan has seen after its creation. There has been a lot of parties, a lot of leaders, just like Fatma Jinnah and, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. And what we saw was like their parties and their struggle died down after they passed away, so is this the same that's going to happen with the PTI? Like, people call it like a big bag of wind, and it's just one-man show, and it's all just Imran Khan. Like recently we saw in these by-elections, they were like, you won on 6 seats, and the only other candidate which PTI had, the daughter of Shah Mahmood Qureshi, she couldn't win. So do you have a plan after, like for PTI, after Imran Khan, do you have a systematic way where there's going to be a successor to the party, to your struggle, or it's just the Imran Khan?
Well, look, first of all, I don't have any family which is, none of my family members are in politics, as opposed to the two family parties where all top positions are their family members. And I repeat, the only way of having meritocracy in the party are intra-party elections. And the first thing after the general elections, this is exactly what we are going to do. We will hold intra-party elections, and that is the way you avoid dynastic politics and you have meritocracy. So last question, please.
Can I recognize this member here, please?
Assalamu alaikum, sir. My name is Imran Khan. My question to you is regarding with the long march that you are organizing currently. With this historic feat that inshallah you can achieve, what do you think this will impact in the future of Pakistan, and what is the message that you're trying to send to your opponents?
Look, democratic parties always go back to the public. So either they want elections to show that they have majority support, which is what democracy is, or if you want to protest, you go to public. So this will be a big protest. It will be peaceful within our constitutional rights. We will remain, we will not break any laws. We've assured everyone that. But it is very important for a democratic party to show that where does the public stand. Now, I remember when Britain entered the Iraq war. I think one of the most amazing sights for me was when I saw almost 2 million people marching in London against the war. And I think that that's a sign of a nation that is alive, that is aware, that knows its rights. So this is what I'm trying to do in Pakistan. Make people realize that, no one should impose governments on us. We as the people, it's our right. So, we should decide who should govern Pakistan. No outside conspiracy involving, and plus these cabal of crooks. They by spending money which they have and, imposing a government on us and then using state oppression to crush us. We are not animals. We are human beings. Humans have rights. So this is what we are trying to do. This march will show where the people of Pakistan stand. And I feel that, you know, it will be historic, inshallah. I'm a born optimist. Having a sporting background, you never enter a match thinking you lose, so you always think you'll win. So I feel that it will be one of the biggest protest movements in Pakistan's history. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.